Welcome to Live United. Tonight, we have an exciting guest joining us. Her name is Mindy Cambiar. Mindy is with the 100 Night Shelter here in Keene, and she's going to be sharing a little bit of information. But we do want to welcome you to the show. I'm Kelly Steiner, your host, and Mindy, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's pretty exciting to be here on television.
Well, we are glad that you could join us. And, we had a little bit of a chance to talk before we actually went live here. And we're talking a little bit about 100 Night Shelter. And, Live United is really around the people that are making a difference out in the community. And the United Way is rich in its partners that exist out there. And you're one of our partners. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of 100 Night Shelter and how you became a partner of the United Way?
Sure. 100 Nights started in 2009 with a small group of people who were very concerned about folks that they saw who were homeless in the middle of the winter. They were not eligible for one reason or another to go into the regular shelter system, or there were not any beds available for them to go into the regular shelter. And the founders felt that it was a really good idea to provide a shelter space for people in that predicament. So they actually did a lot of hard work, had a lot of support from the community and the fire department and the city and the other shelters at the beginning there to get it together and open up fast. So now we are going into our fourth year of providing shelter in the same location, 17 Lamson Street in Keene. Since that time, we have become an incorporated nonprofit organization. Our mission is twofold. We try to have clean, warm space that's safe with 24 bunk beds available every night during the winter season. And we also try to have a resource center open on our first floor space where people can come in during the day if it's either extremely cold or extremely hot, and have some sustenance of body and spirit.
Well, you mentioned that you have 24 beds and a drop-in resource center.
Yes.
So typically, how many people come and are served by 100 Nights in the winter months?
In the winter months, last season, we had 104 different people come in and use the shelter space. And over the course of the 100 nights, there were 1,686 bed nights provided, so an average of 17, sometimes 14, sometimes 23, but always available.
Mindy, I know you're new as the Executive Director
Yes.
at 100 Nights, but I am wondering if you know any about the need and whether we've seen an increase here in the Monadnock region in terms of the use of 100 Night Shelter. I think we're all aware that the economy is having tremendous impact. On previous shows, we've talked about economic opportunity and homelessness. Certainly, a stability for people is part of that economic opportunity, being one of the needs here in the Monadnock region.
Right.
So I'm wondering what you're seeing happening here that points to maybe some of the future directions and areas that you feel like you need to do more with.
Well, first of all, I think that it is, right now there is an effort underway amongst the city and the shelters in town to come up with a more common denominator for how homelessness is defined and how residency is defined, because there are very different definitions out there. And once we come up with a common denominator and can work together to help everybody who's in this situation, then I think we will have a much better idea of how that help can be accomplished. I know that personally, I think that there will always be people who choose to be homeless for whatever reason, whether they've made bad decisions in their lives and have substance abuse issues, or through no fault of their own have some form of mental illness and fall in and out of the system. But there are people that I see who come in now who really just need a helping hand. I know that there are some people who are homeless right now who are also working, who, hopefully with other services in town and people helping them along, one hand at a time, that they will eventually get back on their feet. I'm thrilled that the Southwest Community Services Program got the Hearth grant recently, which the purpose is to rapidly rehouse people. I think that's fantastic. But I do think there's a percentage of the population that will always need a bed.
And do you see any vets coming into that system? Is there any particular sort of demographic to the population that you're seeing being served? Because I think lots of times the public thinks, maybe it's a certain population. And I know, when I've been to the shelter and visited and things, that it can be quite a broad array of people in need of temporary housing.
Yes, a very broad array. Last year, I know that, for example, during one specific week, there was a young family, mother, father, 2 children, 2 small children, along with several vets who had no place else to go, as well as a couple of young women who had some serious mental illness problems going on and nowhere to turn to at that point. It wasn't until a few months later that they were able to access some resources, and a broad range of men who were looking for employment of all different ages. The Veterans Program, I think, there's a new one just starting in town. Southwest Community Services, again, got another grant to do a homeless vets program, and I'm thrilled about that. It's horrible to think that there are homeless veterans out there with nobody to turn to. I have, in the last 2 weeks, had 2 homeless veterans come to the door of 100 Nights, and we haven't been able to do anything to help. I made several calls to some other homeless agencies, but until we're up and running with the actual homeless vets thing, I couldn't take them in because it's not December 21st yet.
I was just going to ask you that question. I know that you have a date that you open, and is there any flexibility ever in that, given weather conditions? Like today's a warm day, or it's been a warm day.
I am going to say that if there is a severe weather storm brewing out there, that we would open our doors before December 21st, just because it seems so cruel to not be able to open. In the last couple of weeks, we've had some very cold nights, and I have been... Well, I come into work in the morning, and it's painful to look at people huddling outside the door at the resource center waiting for 9 o'clock, and they're gray and they're shaking, and I hate that. I have had several groups in the community, especially in the last 2 weeks, ask me that same question. My answer has been, we have 2 things to overcome in order to even think about that. To open earlier or stay open later on a regular basis. We have 2 questions to deal with. We have to have enough volunteers to make that happen. And we do have a nice solid group of volunteers who do it for the 100 nights, but we would need to expand that. And we would need, I think, before we even thought about going longer, we would have to show that we could sustain ourselves for a full year before I even took it on as a question. I have not been there for a whole year, and when I got there, our finances were not in the best shape that I've seen finances in. So we're working very hard to raise money from many different areas and try to be a little creative with some grant opportunities and make it happen, make ourselves a sustainable organization.
So we know there's a need. We know that you're really looking at how you're utilizing resources, and it sounds like you're working with lots of different partners out in the community to meet the needs of the population. You mentioned that you need volunteers. Are there other needs that the 100-Night Shelter has to be able to make the program sustainable, to be able to serve this population that we're talking about?
Well, volunteers is a huge part of it. Can I talk about volunteers for another second?
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, there's a couple of specific program areas that we're trying to encourage volunteerism in. We would, on a more serious level this winter, try to, for lack of a better name, we're just calling it Healthy Feet. One of the biggest problems with the homeless population is that when it's cold and possibly wet, their feet suffer terribly because they don't have warm enough boots or shoes, or they don't have enough clean socks. And often they develop ulcers or other problems with their feet. So we're really hoping to get a nice box of medicated foot powder and bandages and warm, clean socks. And right now we have one nurse who's offered to come in and talk to people and help them take care of their feet if need be. It would be nice if we had another one or two, as well as the actual supplies. One of the other things that we have found that people really respond to gratefully that we just lost access to is a haircut every now and then. There was a local hairdresser who came in once a month to do haircuts in the resource center, and she had to move on. Her job changed hours, and now we find ourselves needing somebody else.
So those are some very specific
Yes.
skills that people out in our community could offer to 100-Night Shelter. And it sounds like also some goods potentially, because I'm hearing you say socks. I know I read about the work that you're, with the foot program that you're looking at doing, and one of the things that you mentioned in there is that people oftentimes are wearing donated shoes that may not actually fit their
right.
feet. So that also contributes to their foot problems that they
Yes.
may be having. So it sounds like there's some real basic human needs that we could provide that are kind of minimal resources.
Yes.
A lot of it is volunteer, but some of it is actual, maybe package of socks being,
Right.
and can people drop something like that off at the 100-Night Shelter?
Yeah, the resource center is open Monday through Friday from 9 to 4 and open for drop-offs like that. And then on weekends, we actually have a tailgate dinner. Well, it was called tailgate in the beginning because it was actually served out of the back of a car with a tailgate. You don't see those much anymore. So that is from 5:30 to 6:30. So drop-offs are available then as well.
So can people drop food off at all?
Yes. So right now what we have is the Community Kitchen has been really good, treating us as one of their coalition members. And so once a week we get a box of food from them, and it's food that people tend to use for breakfast time. So bread, butter, peanut butter, things like that are always welcome. And then they send us a lot of their leftovers so that people can have them at lunchtime, which is really great. But the tailgate dinner on Saturday nights and any food that's provided on Sunday nights at the open mic session is food that groups in the community are currently doing. Right now there are 8 churches, 2 youth groups who are on a rotating basis making a big pot of chili or some lasagna and salad and bringing it over. The Saturday night folks really love to stay and serve and talk to everybody. It's a wonderful way to get to know what's going on with the program and the people who are using it.
That's fabulous. And, you know, one of the things I know the United Way has been working with all of our partners right now on really looking at the work that they're doing, how that's of value in potentially changing behavior, skills,
Yes.
Knowledge for people. And, you know, things like your foot program and you know, making sure that people have their basic needs met, you know, shelter, warmth, food.
Yes.
Are all important things. What are some of the other things that you're doing that you think really have an impact on the people you're serving that ultimately, I'm sure you have stories about people who've been able to move out of that kind of housing situation into more traditional housing?
I think that one of the biggest areas that helps us 100 Nights move people forward and change behavior is having the networking ability with other agencies. We've had several people over this last season who came in with nothing and ended up being referred to an older adults retraining program who then helped them get internships unpaid to see how they would work out and have since been hired full-time. One of the gentlemen was just hired at the Chester Medical Center on the maintenance staff, and he's now actually renting a room in an actual home and thrilled to death because he's been reunited with his cat. Today, for example, when I left there, Aid Services was there doing a presentation, an educational presentation, and they are going to come in and do testing. Hoping, that kind of behavior certainly is something that, if changed, would be positive, that kind of behavior. I don't know what I meant by that, but there are a couple of programs that we're pretty excited about starting. We have some volunteers from the college coming in, and they're going to be doing holiday crafts with people. And that may sound like a foolish thing to be doing with people who have no jobs, and we also encourage them to look for jobs and do resume writing and get their GEDs and things like that. But I have found that people who have nothing to do really appreciate having something to do with their hands and creating something and feeling good about it. And when you feel better about yourself, I think you're more able to stay positive and keep going, one foot in front of the other. So we're having our first craft class on December 6th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Well, you know, one of the things we've talked about on previous shows is that sense of belonging, really wanting to be part of the community. And I think whether you're homeless or not, you still want to have that feeling that you belong somewhere. And I do think the Monadnock region has been a place that really welcomes people. And I think the 100-Night Shelter has become a core piece of really making sure we support those basic needs of people out there. And you talked a little bit about some of the future directions and where you're heading. You also mentioned that sustainability is a challenge. And so what are you doing to really address sort of that sustainability piece, and how are other organizations supporting you in doing that?
Well, the United Way has been very helpful in that area, which really made me feel better. The first United Way meeting, allocations meeting that I went to was when I had first said, I think maybe I'll try to see if I can make this work. I think part of the reason in the past that the organization has not been, it's not that it hasn't been sustainable, it's just that it hasn't had a paid staff. And it's very difficult to ask people to give 30, 40 hours a week in work time without paying them anything. And that was probably one of the first things that I had to say to the board of directors was, you know, you're sucking people dry, and it's not okay. I understand that there's not money, lots of money in the bank to pay people with, but we're going to have to take a leap of faith here, and you are going to have to say, yes, we're going to pay people, and then whoever is working here, me, the board, people who are coming in, we all have to take an active role in trying to promote the organization to raise money. So we have now set up a network with the faith communities. We have a retired minister on our board who is gathering all the churches and going one-on-one to meet with them and trying to talk to them about what we can do to work together to raise the money that we need for rent, for example. The city of Keene, we're in negotiations with the city of Keene on how we can improve our relationship with them and the other shelters in town so that we can all be working together instead of, having a debate about who's a resident of what and who isn't, and make a difference in people's lives that need the services.
How many shelters are there in the Monadnock region?
In the Monadnock region, that's more than in Keene. In Keene, there are 3 right now. I know that there's one in Peterborough, and I know there's one in Jaffrey. I believe that the warming shelter that is for Walpole, I'm not actually sure if it's in Walpole or closer to Bellows Falls.
And do all the shelters connect together as well?
We try to stay in communication. We try to call one another when we know that somebody needs help. The welfare officers in the different towns, I've also gotten some calls from various welfare officers in the last couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks have been hard because it's cold, and there has not been any bed availability in the state, so it's been hard.
So for the folks that are on the street right now, they actually don't have a warm place to go in this cold weather currently.
I know of a couple of people right now who have no place to go and are sleeping on park benches. Yeah, and a couple of people in tents. Many people, when it gets this cold and they know we can't open yet, they scramble to, find a family member or a friend who might be able to put them up for a week or 2 on somehow.
I was going to ask you that question. Do a lot of the folks that you see, do they have other support systems available to them? Or are they in a situation where they're really kind of on their own and, again, just looking for those basic needs of warmth, food?
My best guesstimate is that most of them don't have a really good support system at all. We have one young woman right now with a small child who's pregnant, who's been living in her car because there was no bed at the women's or family shelter and we're not open. And she's been having a very difficult time because the father of her baby just died. And I mean, yes, there are resources out there that she will be able to tap into now that she's made a connection with somebody, us, and we're hoping very hard that we can
But sometimes
her.
that takes time.
It does take time, and in the meantime, they're in their car.
Yep. So you have a crisis situation, and we can only hope that nothing bad happens in a situation like that. You mentioned that you had 104 people come through last year. Was that in the last year?
At the shelter only.
At the shelter. And then you serve a lot more people than that. But from the shelter side of things, do you expect that to increase this year at all?
I have a feeling that it will increase this year. I can hope that it won't, but I think that it will.
I just had an opportunity to review a little bit of NPR's review on the food stamp situation.
Yes.
And of course, New Hampshire's in a tough place in regards to that. And we
It
have a
is.
lot of people that are having to make a choice between, do I purchase food or do I pay the rent? And so that's part of the reason I'm asking the question, because I'm wondering if we'll see an increase in people who just can't afford their housing.
Yeah, I think so. It is something that needs to be addressed somehow. Not just here. I don't want to make it. It's not just here. It is nationwide. It's all over the country. This problem with lack of affordable housing and no increase in wages. I mean, it's all tied together.
And we saw that in the needs assessment that was done here in the
Yes.
Monadnock region. We saw that we had a higher rate of homelessness than the rest of the state of New Hampshire. We also saw that our livable wage is lower here in the Monadnock region than in a lot of other portions of the state and country.
Yeah.
So that increases the challenges we have when it comes to addressing people's basic needs, because
It does.
they are having to make those hard choices in their lives, especially if they have family that they're trying to support. Are there other things that'll be happening in the future for 100 Nights? You've talked about the resource center side of things a little bit. Will that be expanding at all?
It would be great to expand the resource center, and not just in terms of programming. It would be nice to have a little bit more space. We have so little storage space and so little space to work in right now. So there's a question forming in the heads of the board of directors about what to do about that when our lease expires, which is not for another year and a few months. But it's a good time to start thinking about it. Is it feasible to find a different place to move to? Is it better to reconfigure the space we have somehow? One of the most exciting things that's happening at the Resource Center, I hope, is that the Dartmouth Hitchcock Clinic and 100 Nights have been trying to figure out how and if it will work to open a free once-a-week clinic for the homeless population in Keene. Not just us, but Southwestern also, anybody who's homeless, and do it in the resource center space. So it would need a dedicated room with a sink, and that is what I'm trying to figure out this week, is that if it's possible. I did write a grant that was funded to do some of the things like flooring and possibly the sink, but we need volunteer labor to make it happen.
Well, this is a great time to do that shout out for
Yes.
Volunteers for work like that. And
Yes.
certainly, we as a United Way are always open to working with our volunteer base to see if we can connect them with our agencies. So glad to hear about that, because it certainly gives us something to also look at how we can support you a bit more. Are there other things that you would really want the public to know about the work that 100 Nights is doing, the impact it's having on people's lives? Any personal stories you want to share?
I've spent the last 2 Fridays going into one of the call classes at Keene State College for the seniors. Mm-hmm. Seniors, yeah, like they're so much older than me. And it's been interesting because it's been the part of the class that I've been talking to them about and working with them with has to do with homelessness. And they pretty much bombarded me with questions. And what happened was that it came out that they thought that we needed a whole new marketing plan, because they had not realized, as people in the community, that 100 Nights was in fact doing things more than on 100 Nights. I was like, yes, well, the name, I guess, is a misnomer, but now I understand that you're telling me I need to have a different kind of marketing plan. And then they jumped in and offered to help write a survey. A class full of experienced people like that, you can't turn that down. And they were expressing that the other problem with our marketing, well, not a problem with it, but what we needed to address in a marketing plan was that, well, this is a quote, "I haven't come in yet to volunteer because I'm afraid to come in. I have a fear about the population that you're serving, and I don't know if I can bring myself to come there." So they were saying that that was something I needed to address as well. And I think that while I have some understanding of that fear, I also think that most of the people who are our consumers, our guests, are people who are really just looking to be treated like a human being and want to know that somebody cares about them, and that then you'll find a genuine being under there who's willing to give back.
I started the top of the show with, we all want to have a place where we belong.
Yes.
And it sounds like the folks that come visit you, that's what they're looking for, a place where they can belong, a place where they can feel safe and sheltered.
Exactly.
And nurtured to some degree. And I mentioned that you've got some exciting things happening in the future. If you could make a wish and really look to the future and see what could change, what would you like to see be different? What would you like the role of 100 Nights to be in the future?
Well, I do think a resource center is a very good thing for a community to have. A space where it's, and there are lots of agencies doing many, many things out there in the community. That's not it, but a place where people can come in and get some information. Where do I go? How do I have this presentation? I think that expanding the programming there would be a wonderful thing. The shelter, I think that the shelter, I personally think that the shelter should be open a few more days every year. I don't think 100 is enough. I understand the original purpose of the 100 days, but it is darn cold sometimes in the beginning of December and the end of November and the beginning of April. So I would like to be able to look at that with an open mind.
Do you ever hope that the need for your services will ever go away?
I think almost any basic needs agency hopes that someday they will put themselves out of existence because they've done such a good job. But
well, you mentioned some challenges that you have. They are a good percentage of your clientele and your guests. You mentioned them as guests. Do they have mental health needs and substance abuse?
Yes.
Yeah, so those are some of the challenges that you face in providing service to these folks.
Well, I think that's a huge issue. I think the substance abuse and mental health programs have lost a lot of funding, and we're seeing a reflection of that. Yeah, it's tough.
Is 100 Nights in any position to provide advocacy and really take a look at and communicate to the legislature some of what they're seeing and some of what the needs of not just the Monadnock region, but it sounds like the whole state maybe?
I think that would be a great step for us to be part of. I definitely think that.
Well, the show's called Live United, and we talk about volunteering, and it certainly sounds like volunteers is something you're in need of. We have some basic needs that you're hoping for, things like shoes, socks.
Yes.
Are there other things, coats?
Warm clothing of any kind, long underwear.
And can people just bring that to the drop-in center?
Yes.
So it can go directly to you?
Yep. And the medicated powder, any kind of personal care item.
Toiletries, food?
Toilet paper, paper towels, coffee. Yeah, there's a list. We have a whole list on our website as well.
And what's your website, Mindy?
It's 100nightsinc.org.
Okay. And if people wanted to be able to look up shelter information, is that the best resource, or should they give a call to the shelter?
Shelter information in what sense? Just anything?
If they want to be able to donate, if they want to be able to volunteer, if they want to know more about the services you are providing, or if they feel like they have a skill or a knowledge or something they want to share with you.
Well, the website's definitely a good place to start, but the phone is also great. Anybody can call me, and I'd be happy to sit down and meet with them and talk on the phone or email back and forth and figure out a way that somebody can fit in to help.
Do you have an email address you want to share?
I do. I might have to spell it. It's Cambiar, which is Cambiar at 100nightsinc.org.
Okay. And certainly they can also go to the United Way website, and
Yes.
they will find you listed as one of our partners. And we do feel fortunate to have you as a partner. And as we think about Living United in the future and really some of the making a difference in the community, it's organizations like yours that do make that difference, and we're glad to be able to support you and work with you in partnership. We're excited about where we're heading in terms of being focused and really
Yes.
being able to look at how we're having impact on the Monadnock region and making things better here.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before I close?
I think that one of the reasons I keep coming back to this community is because it is so wonderfully connected in so many ways, and that so many people who live here are so willing to sometimes even take a risk in order to help somebody else. But it's one of the greatest communities I've ever lived in the entire country. And as you know, I ran away from here for quite some time. So yes, I'm proud to be part of it.
There's something about that mountain that always seems
the
to draw us
mountain.
back. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to remind people that you can share your story about Living United and how you're making a difference out in the community. We will select one story a week that we'll share in the next week's show. That person will receive a Live United t-shirt. And you can do that by contacting Kelly, Kelly, at MUW.org, or visiting the Monadnock United Way website. And I want to just remind you to give. You heard Mindy talk about volunteer, advocate, Live United. Thank you for joining us.